in a school of entitled as Esfahan. Second episode. What have we done with soil? This is the credit title of the second part of our documentary. The background in turquoise is a repetitive tile working commonly named as NAJAFI, and the titles are made of peshwar tiles colored in yellow and black, a simple imitation of Banai calligraphy. And here, these sequence of turquoise tiles are making something, not completed yet, called مقرنس by the architects. In other words, stalactites. Well, مقرنس got completed with معرق, in other words, mosaic tile working, and only these white parts are left till we get back to more attentively. معرق or mosaic tile working is said to be so elaborate in art and rich in details. This is its deep blue background composed of 134 pieces. It's not just a wild guess or estimation. We've exactly counted them. Then, the turquoise comes to complete the design with 110 pieces. And in the following, white. Well, this pelican is partially shaped with its surrounding. Then the orange color comes to make the flower fresher. Afterwards, the green color to do more in beautifying our pelican. Now, we darken the image and give red border lines in order to illustrate where the position of black color tile is, all through the design. Now to know where it's green in our work of art and where there is intricately posited with biscuits called tokhmegozari in architect's jargon that are made of brick would again be impossible lest we darken the image some a little more. The positing of this unglazed brick or biscuit in the middle and the petals and the disc of flowers. This action is called tokhmegozari in tile workers' jargon. Well, positing the last tokhme or tiny biscuit of our mosaic tile tableau located in the second story of the portal, the entrance doorway of Jame Abbasi Mosque, we step further backwards away from the mosque and its doorways. Appreciating all these fixture designs or tile working facades on the surface of this portal built in such intricacy and abundance of minute tiles. I can say nothing in admiration, but God bless you all tile workers. Well, from the portal, we turn our face to Nakhsh Jahan Square, where the mosque is located in its south, and then we poke ahead in the many entrances to the plaza, of course, not without its own reason. Posht Matbakh Ali, Sadi Ali, the entrance to the plaza from Ostandari Street, the entrance from Mascara, in other words, Copper Workers Bazaar, the entrance from Sepah Street, قیصریه بازار. Chai Haj Mirza and its connection to the plaza, and of course, vice versa. Hafiz Street, the entrance from Ahangaran, in other words, Blacksmith's Bazaar. The portal of Sheikh Lutfullah Mosque with 2 entrances in 2 sides, leading to the 2 directions of the bazaar in north and the bazaar in the south. The entrance from Charsu MASOUD. And finally, the doorway of Jama Abbasi Mosque, that from 2 directions leads both to the roofed eastern bazaar and the roofed western one. And why did we intend to run this much talk about all these entrances to the square? Did we intend to say this is a vast plaza? Yes, that's right. The expanse of this plaza's area is equal to 83,130 square meters. Did we intend to say that it's easy to access? Yes, to some extent. For those who know the directions in the city of Esfahan well, the access to the very plaza would not be any difficult. We intended to say that lots of things can be said, but our main intention above all was to say that this expanse, with all of the great places surrounding and encompassing it, I mean the many bazaars and the vast passages, caravansarays and great mosques, are all structured, almost all brought about from soil, just soil, and nothing but soil. And this means self-efficiency in that style of architecture that is Iranian architecture. And of course, in one of its subdivisions that is called Esfahan School of Architecture. What is meant by self-efficiency here? Self-efficiency is to provide the construction prerequisite materials from what seems to be available at hand nearby. In other words, where the constructor is constructing his structure. Well, in Esfahan, neither was the availability of any jungle nor the extensive access to stone, but soil is found abundantly. And now, as everything is brought about by soil in different forms and shapes, therefore the fixture design or facade of the buildings is also made of soil. Something made of this soil drawn in color in order to change form into tiles. And of course, tile working is the most abundant and available design in the structure of this school. The School of Architecture, that is the result of the artwork of highly skillful Iranian master artists of that era, the period of King Abbas I, the time that Esfahan had been chosen to be the capital of Iran after 1598 AD. Well, as a prerequisite material for tile making, it's nothing but soil. What we firstly start with is also nothing but the preparation of soil or the clay. What you see is the clay grinding process in today's Esfahan 2011. According to what tile makers told us, the soil they use in most cases nowadays is the red and black clay from Dolatabad in Esfahan. And of course, occasionally as the commuting is not so difficult as long ago in the past, the red soil of Save and the white soil of Abade, if available, would be used in tile making, as both are good kinds of soil for doing so. Next, The tile makers who make khume, or the biscuits, do care about 3 factors, considering them sensitively as a matter of their long experience. 1. The clay. It should be a good clay, highly sticky. 2. The degree of the clay's purity should be high. And 3. There should be no stone pieces or gravel, especially limestone, in the clay, as to its severe damage to the work of tile makers. Then, if there was no problem in regard to any of these 3 factors, and if the clay is ground well, they sprinkle some water on it till later to prepare it for another stage called khume by tile makers. Khume, in other words, the preparation of biscuits. Well, that smooth sprinkling of water in order not to make it muddy was because of this we see. Pressing of the water sprinkled clay with a pressure of 10 to 15 tons. That's of course what we have seen. But in Esfahan School of Architecture, and in the past, not so long ago, and maybe even now, if it is meant to work traditionally, according to this man's saying, being both a practical master in tile working and a knowledgeable instructor in teaching, the late master, Mahmoud Mahironaksh, the biscuit of khume, was not used to be pressed. It was used to be molded similar to making mud bricks. And of course, in 2 shapes, or with 2 kinds of prerequisite materials that are different. 1. Mud tiles, kashia geli, made only by the clay. 2. Object or gravel stone tiles. Mud tiles are those mostly made into polychrome tiles. The polychrome tiles working that is among the specific fixture design established and discovered in Esfahan School of Architecture. On the other hand, object tiles consist of flint stones or river gravel added with fuller's earth, absorbent clay, glass powder, and finally, water. This mixture, after being molded, was mostly used for construction for tiny mosaic tiles working and by tile workers at that time. But here today, for the use of mosaic tile workers, this one is used, that is, as we saw, made by press machines, and in this way, something similar to polychrome tiles of that era, that is mud tile. Also today, in 2011, as what we have seen, the biscuit of polychrome tiles are all brought from modern factories. This khume has nothing to do with those traditional tiles neither, as a matter of origin, nor in resistance and durability, of course. Well, khume, either object tile or the one named as mud tile, are all taken to treating furnace. In regard to the shape, treating furnaces are cylindrical. In the method, which is called motabaq, or stratified, the biscuits are put horizontally on each other with a space in between in this way as we see. Till the furnace is full of tiles, then the heating starts. Among the advantages of these furnaces are, first, the heat is not direct and all of a sudden, but gradual and moderate, and the tiles would be treated in a better way. Secondly, as a matter of quantity of treating, this furnace has the capacity to include more tiles and is more economical than this one, which is called vertical or mirror furnace. The furnace is also shaped in a cylindrical form with a closed opening, but the tiles are vertically put in it. We haven't seen any of these furnaces in Esfahan today, but in Esfahan School of Architecture, based on what we know about treating the tiles, it is said that it is used to be done in both kinds of furnaces, especially when there had been lack of time. Though we know that this furnace can include fewer tiles, the treating speed is higher, and as a result, this furnace is a faster one. Manufacturing paints. Tile is treated mud bricks, smeared by paint, but not any possible one. The base, the paint established upon here, is metal. In other words, lead and tin. Well, we know that these two should get to melting degree, and we see that lead was first taken to the furnace and then tin. Then, after melting and turning the heat off, the mode of the metal that is fluid now would get cool being exposed to weather and getting cooler. It would be this. This powder of lead and tin, when added with the mixture of flintstone and glass crystals, mixed with water, glazed on tile, taken out of the furnace, would be white. Such as this white color, after being treated with the technique of narrow tile working, is a fixture design for this eastern minaret, the eastern minaret of Jami' Abbasi Mosque. But the point is that the paint on tile is not limited to white. This lead and tin powder, plus these glass fillings, when being mixed with other elements, will result in other colors. As the most fundamental fixture designed in Esfahan School of Architecture is tile working, and indeed so colorful. For instance, tin plus lead added with flintstone mixed with glass crystal, if added with copper fillings, it will come to be the paint so famous and abundant and used in this school. In other words, turquoise. The color of this twisted curved tile working named Pichkashi or Zagare at the margin of this mehrab, the mehrab of Char Bagh Madrasa or seminaries. The underlying solid background paint, in other words, Zirangi. Well, here, when those lead and tin and the other elements are mixed with water, changes to glaze. When covered with glaze, khume changes, for instance, to this black hue. This black single-colored tile, in other words, takrangi, is called solid underlying background tile or zirangi, with the application it has from the era of Esfahan School of Architecture till now in 2011. We've intentionally colored the background in white in order to see how these solid black underlying background tiles are put together one after another to shape the mosaic design, little by little, so orderly. After this black color, if the tile's paint is manufactured by the use of lapis lazuli in Esfahan School of Architecture, it had a color family of dark blue, very light blue, and sky blue. That its sky blue is somehow this turquoise color that we see. We know that its high-quality mine has been a village near Kashan. That, as it is said, in the period of Karim Khan Zand, it was ruined as to an earthquake, and no restoration has been undertaken since then. Until later that lapis lazuli was brought from Lalejan in Naishapur, this lapis lazuli is said to be not comparable in quality to that one anymore. Well, this brushing is done in order to remove the dust so that the glaze penetrates well in the texture of the biscuit, to be burnished after being treated with heat, smooth, flat, scintillatingly shiny. About the white color, we said what is made of. Here, white tiles are being increased along with the green tiles in completion of the design in place of flowers and petals. The red glaze. The red color and the family, including maraschino, russet, maroon, bright red, were all brought by Shangaf. In other words, cinnabar or vermilion, an Esfahan school of architecture. At that time, and even now, of course, if the process is done traditionally, cinnabar is still a mixture of pure sulfur and pure mercury. Well, we continue brushing and balancing the liquid, checking the orderly penetration of the glaze. Then again, it is with glazing that the khume will be colored in pink. Then this unglazed brick red comes, and now, finally, this deep green. Our design is being completed by adding some green, some white, and a little red paint, not so dark. Then, with the arrival of this unglazed brownish red, our garden with both its peacocks, we see all branches are flourished in flowers and leaves. Positing these two peacocks in this design, in addition to the other two couples of peacocks, and in this portal, also in other words, the abundance of peacocks in design of Esfahan School of Architecture, has a story in itself that we're going to tell more about later. Well, after glazing, the khume that is now colored, put aside to dry the current moisture, would be taken to the furnace. This is the stratified furnace that the biscuit is treated in before. And now it is the paint's turn to be treated on khume, so that for the color to be posited completely and penetrate appropriately in the texture. We asked about the heat imposed. They said it to be about 1,200 degrees centigrade, and for about 4 to 5 hours. Then if everything has processed appropriately, and the color hasn't spilled like teardrops, and the furnace is cooled down carefully, now we can say that what is expected is prepared by now. So that for the design to be implemented on the paper indeed, and the tiles should also be cut according to the design, as these tiles are for mu'arraq or mosaic tile working. Drawing the curved Eslimi design, gardan, and shaping pishboard tiles, previously molded, or shikaste, angular pattern. Well, this person, Master Shirovi, is preparing the paper for drawing the design. By the way, why do we need a design? Because when we say that tile is treated molded mud, covered in color, this color indeed accompanies according to the design and drawing. The motifs, as we know, are based on two general patterns: curved, gardan, and angular, shikaste. What Master Shirovi is going to draw is a curved pattern design. This design that is being shaped by Hera bricks, azure, and yellow javak, and turquoise hamil manifests an angular pattern with the technique of previously molded or pishboard tiles. In Esfahan School of Architecture, tile working fixtures or design are implemented a lot in various forms. This one that we see is a form named by the technique of pishboard. As we said before, with a shikaste, angular, or geometrical design. Well, the technique for making this pishboard tiles is that the tiles are cut in a given desirable shape before with the use of mold. Then, without operating the design, it will be taken to the furnace. Then, it becomes something, for example, like this. By this, we mean this shape that is complementing the main tie of the design. Sekerona hashed and Zohre. This is the name allotted to it. Why allocating names? Well, because these shapes are going to build up a main geometrical or shikaste pattern of a design. Therefore, as we saw in the tile workers' jargon, each should be allocated a name to be called upon. This one that comes either in pairs or single is called seli by tile workers. And these two that we saw, one is tablet kond and the other one, loz or tokhmak. سرمدان مربع. شمس هشت و تیز. Satare or panchpari tund, that is totally an Iranian design, plus taraqe or separi. Sheshe gol anari. تورنجی تند. And finally, Dane Balut, with Shamse or Khorshidi Da. Well, this was a previously molded pishwar design in shikaste or angular geometrical pattern that is located in the forehead of the entrance door of Eastern Sanctuary and in Sayyid Mosque indeed. The designer is among the contemporary artist Gholam Reza Ebrahimian. Even if the work is not basically a complete restoration work, it still is in a framework that can be included in Esfahan School of Architecture. That is a continuous focus and concentration on a fixture design that is structured based upon such a prerequisite, which is nothing but what we call tile. How to structure a carved gardan design, in other words, drawing. Eslimi. In the philosophy of Esfahan School of Architecture, Eslimi is said to be a modest cypress that is bowing and bending toward the essence and unity of being. How is it drawn? The base of design is the very well-known traditional Iranian motif resembling a cypress tree bending in the wind or botajeke. The method of drawing is a repetition of two circles and another circle encompassed in it. Then, it is by selecting one of the circles and combining it with the arch of that bigger one that we come to something called botajeke motif. What we saw is for drawing botajeke with 3 circles and even more. Then, this motif, if being elongated with exaggeration, will result in eslimi. Eslimi, the modest cypress, can mostly be accompanied with the embellished by other Eslimi designs, providing that what we use should be something harmonious with that same design or the main shape of Eslimi. This, what we see, is a great masterpiece of Eslimi, implemented on a base called kashiye nare, in tile workers' jargon. Chang, resembling lyre or harp, and gere, tie. Chang motif is placed in less crowded parts of Eslimi design as to aesthetic principles so significant a creation, indeed with absorbing point, line, surface principles. Gere motif also has the same figure in Eslimi and Khatai. In addition, as far as the shape, its design resembles Chang. The completion of a great Eslimi design by NARRATED tile working, and this time in blue azure color. Nishan, orientation motif and its variety. The essence of Eslimi design is considered to be characterized with the fact that though exists in there, it should not be so evident. I mean, there is no noticeable show-off of the design indications. Therefore, the beginning of branches should be hidden. We call the motif the concealing point of these branches orientation motif. In other words, nishan, including 1. Lachak, quarter medallion, nishan or katiba, frieze nishan. Botte-jeqe nishan, the orientation of the traditional Iranian motif of bending cypress and wind. Del nishan, Abrak nishan, well, with the completion of Master Shirovi's sketch, that was not just purely an Eslimi design, but an instant of mixture of Eslimi and Khatai. Again, we return to our Eslimi masterpiece in completion, so huge and elevated. We see that the white color is filling the design one after another with NARRATED tiles and mu'arraq or mosaic tile working technique. Then, with adding the yellow color, the torque is also completed and the dome glitters in its totality of perfection. The dome of Jame Abbasi Mosque, a great specimen of an extended Eslimi design and an Esfahan school of architecture. But what is to say is that actually, as we know, Eslimi is not just a characteristic feature of this school of architecture, but it has a long history. For instance, this plate is evidently manifesting a curved or Eslimi-orientated design in gilt, belonging to Sassanid era. This one again belongs to Sassanid era with Eslimi design. We are also aware of the long history of tile in Iran. For instance, this one is found in Shush in Iran and goes back to 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ. And this other one is the glaze-treated pot from Achaemenid era, and meticulously, it is notable that this is a tile. A 6-angled luster tile in gilt from the 5th to 6th lunar Hijra, from the 11th to 12th AD. Tile with dragon motif in Azari style. And these two, that both belong to Kashan in 7th century, the era that tile working is found in Kashan in its total elevation. Well, we see that the tile working craft and the Eslimi and Khatai designs are seen a lot in this school of architecture, and in its constant metamorphosis in order for them to come to some genuine holistic and minute innovations. Innovations such as this dispersed single-vaned design. In Esfahan School of Architecture, as we see, these types of designs and patterns are placing themselves in an artistic gradual elevation comparing to the past. The curves and overturns are smooth and orderly. The flowers are located with all their variety either being Abbasi pattern or bud and leaves types in one single vein. In addition to that, Sholeiye Morakab, the compound flame-like flowers, and what we call Khushe Chanpar, multi-petal cluster flowers, are run in a more elongated shape with more intricacies more beautifully in the end of the branches of the vein. And these are all in the School of Architecture and in the pattern of the single vein tile. But about the two-vein tile pattern, what you see in completion can be said to be a second vein. This second vein includes tinier Khatai flowers, so intricate and fresh indeed. And this one, that is coming with its background, is the first vein. Its flowers are bigger and more elaborate, and its Eslimi design is partially different from the other vein. In dispersed, two-vein pattern that is to some extent specific to and grown in the School of Architecture. The shape of the pattern generally manifests a great fluency and fabulous vibrancy. The specimens, the best ones, can be found under this dome chamber and Dados. Both here and in the palace across from it, that is Ali Rapu's palace. But about addressing the question about these specimens with this distinguished and elaborate process were acquired by the tile workers of Esfahan School of Architecture. All was as to the improvement of royal workshops, and especially its being undertaken by them and skillful designers for sketching. Either in the beginning of that era of this school with the design of Reza Abbasi, so magnificently skillful as we see, or at the end of that era that, for instance, the tile designs might have been sketched and presented by Muhammad Zaman. The Muhammad Zaman that the painting is one of his works of art. Allocating numbers. Whoever the design belongs to, for the one-to-one implementation of the design on the tiles, when it is under Mu'arraq style or mosaic tile working, it should be allocated some numbers. These numbers are based on the color and the shape of the motifs. In order for this elaborate and intricate design not to get unsorted and mixed up while installation as to the abundance of pieces. Cutting the paper. The sheet of paper that is the exact pattern of the design for the cutting tiles should be cut delicately. Then, they are put together based on the similarity in the shape. If not symmetrical, they would be put together based on the color. Those allocated with the same color are posited on the same place. as something the design is so complicated and so huge as this one. After cutting the paper, in mu'arraq or mosaic tile working, when the paper is going to be the model pattern for cutting the hardened tiles, the method is to stick the paper on the zirangi or solid colored tiles. Sticking the pieces of paper. What do we see here? A little glue, some zirangi tiles, and indeed, a pile of cut, unsorted paper. Well, these should be used carefully as models by this man. And of course, for a kind of art or craft that for its intricacies is so precious now and has been so in the past too. So, what he does is not just sticking the paper. It needs experience and so much care, consciousness, and being agile. He should stick the paper inverted in a way that the loaded signs of the numbers allocated could be seen clearly. And indeed, it is on the glazed side of the tile to which the paper is stuck based on the color. Also, he's meticulously careful to have some 5mm distance between the two pieces of paper while being stuck. It is notable that if the paper gets any wrinkle while being stuck, in the preceding stage, the worker will face some problems. The next level, cutting the pieces. What these men are doing with ads is the first stage of work of cutting the pieces named labzadagi. In other words, cutting the edges. Around the main design, there's always some extra color. When it is carefully beaten with ads, in order to cut and break it, the work is called labzadagi. Well, this brownish red herre and those narrow sequence of turquoise tiles we see. These narrow tile sequins are all edge cut one by one in order to posit them in the middle of the brick. Then, the extra mud is removed delicately from them, exactly what this man is doing. Then, with mogare, a kind of instrument, and of course with a lot of hardship, the Abbasi type of flour is prepared for the other stage called tokhme gozari. In other words, inserting the tiny biscuit in the design that we'll see later. The place for the inserting tiny biscuit, in other words, tokhme, should also be emptied in order to prepare the place for positing something in it. Something similar to this, which is called tokhme gol, the flower petal. Well, here again, when we color the background in white, we see that the background on which the flowers, branches, and eslimi design are to be posited on is a solid deep blue surrounded with 3 hamils in different colors. The more delicate the job, the more intricate the instrument would be, such as this file, the usage of which is after cutting the edges in a stage called gelbordegi, in other words, removing the jagged parts. Here, that all of the jagged parts are removed and the tile pieces are filed, We see that it is with darkening the deep blue that the cream eslimi design posits itself in the azure. Well, with the final treatment, when the tiny biscuits are posited in their own place, the mosaic tile working or mu'arrab opens its own way in establishment in order for the turquoise eslimi design to come with orange flowers and cream designs with red and green pieces of tile, so that the design gets fully exotic in colors in a way as if it is a year here eternally with only one everlasting season of spring. A spring abundant with thousands of flowers. Here, the tiny mosaic tile worker is testing one and only one of those flowers attentively. Stick it with the glue and fill it with the flower by petals of biscuits to make it something like this. This one is the one of the most significant fixture embellishing design of tile working in Esfahan School of Architecture, with the motif that so much reminds us the image of a peacock. The indication of its resemblance to peacock, with the multiplicity of the eyes on its wings to this peacock in the inner crust of Sheikh Lotfullah's mosque dome chamber, doesn't seem unrelated, as their corresponding resemblance is in a way that by no means it can be said that this might be just a similarity that has taken place accidentally. But it mostly seems that this peacock is related to a mythical infrastructure that exists in the perspective of Iranian fundamental conceptions. And indeed, in the part which is Islamic too. Its reason is the abundance of peacock motif in the structure of this school, or Esfahan School of Architecture. For instance, this one that we see is in the facade or the portal of Sayyid Mosque of Esfahan. And this other one is done in MASOUD BEIG Mosque in the period of King Abbas I. This one also is the one we were putting it together one by one since the first part of this documentary. I mean the Jame Abbasi Mosque and the peacock on its portal. Well, these are all done in Safaviad era except one of them. But when we see this street, in fact, we see that the continuation of the School of Architecture is not just limited to this period, in other words, Safaviad era. For instance, this one is an elaborate peacock, the history of which goes back to the early Pahlaviad dynasty, built of mu'arraq or mosaic tile working, only for embellishing design of the facade of a store. Whose work is this? No signature is found. When is it done? We said maybe some 50 to 70 years ago. We see that the peacock motif is continuously seen even some years after that period. I mean, Safaviad era. Finally, it has come to be like this, which is among the latest veins of embellishing tile working on its publicized, less artistic form. The people are commuting so busy of their routines, no one may heed this that, for instance, some poets such as Sa'ib Tabrizi in this school of poetry, in other words, Esfahan School of Poetry, might have written a poem such as this. Till I got to the house of angels, of the unity and integration of being Sa'ib, the foot of the peacock is as beautiful as its wings for me. The poem that exactly brings about the same philosophical mindset and spirit that has established those tile-working designs. I mean, that embellishing tile-working of Sheikh Lotfallah's mosque dome, though this one is a contemporary one, both as to its construction and as to its underlying viewpoint. It can be said that it is a return to a more publicized and updated manifestation of art. On the facade of a store now, a totally mundane reflection with the use of tiles as construction material that, as we said, goes back to no more than at most 50 to 70 years ago. But the essence and identity of tile working is not just what we said so far. In order to have a look around another type of this art and an Esfahan school of architecture, we return again to Sheikh Mosque, and we see that the Mu'arraq tile working style has brought about so much expertise and variety in the usage of calligraphy and the application of a style which is called Banai calligraphy.
والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين.
Well, what is heard was the recitation of Master Mansuri from the Surah 10 under the dome of Sheikh Mosque with the kind of calligraphic script called Banai and with the technique known as Mu'arraq. Well, up to here, what is seen, either in the first episode or here, that is the second episode of our documentary piece, was investigating on tiles in regard to glazing. But here, what we see is the other side of the project. And it is in this aspect of the job that the intricacies can be seen. A very complicated job requiring so much care and attention, called collection as an expression in tiles workers' jargon. In this part, that now the flowers are completed and the biscuits in tiny pieces are posited well in their allotted place, the tile workers spread a version of the work that can be repeated in the general sketch. For instance, this spandrel that he starts to posit the pieces based on the numbers specified, as we saw in the allocating numbers. An elaborate positioning almost in the same method of implementation from the era of Esfahan School of Architecture till now. Either the work is a complicated mehrab with stalactite method such as what we see, or a relatively simpler spandrel. Even it can be this embellishing design structured for around this column made of narrated tiles. Anyhow, whatever it is, it should be fixed in its own position until later that is going to be fixed and erected forever. To do so, the back of the design that is covered with plaster is firstly sprinkled with water. Then the places that are supposed to have curves or breakdowns in the design are filled with mud in order to have better separation later. By later, we mean here that these intertwined hems are put in the back of design, these rope-like hems. And of course, it is here in Esfahan and the central region of the country that this occurs with materials of hemp. As in other places, especially those that are nearer to the south, these fibers are mostly taken from palm trees. But what is this for? Firstly, because after removing the plaster, these fibers act like a handle in order to easily pick up the mu'arraq tiles from the floor. Secondly, it is only by these fibers that our mu'arraq tile working would get stiffer while being installed on the main structure or building with plunging the fibers into the plaster poured behind the tiles. It would be more persistent and erected in this way. Persistent just as this embellishing design around this column that is being installed by these tile workers in the current year, 2011. The construction base is what we call narrate tile working, with the method of mu'arraq that we run a lot about, and it was a shikaste or angular design. It should be noted that even when the design is gardan or curved, beside Eslimi morphology that we talked about in the first of this episode, it has another shape too, which is so precious and significant in Esfahan School of Architecture. That of course is worth mentioning. Drawing khatai design. This hand we see busy of drawing and making pattern is of course intending to bring about a design with khatai pattern for polychrome tiles. And as we know, the underlying element in khatai pattern is mainly the flower. Therefore, we firstly direct our attention to the flower, and in the first step, initially how can it be drawn in khatai. One, shaping the flower by the repetition of circles. In this method, by drawing a base circle and repetition of 2 circles in that one, the flower will emerge. Indeed, with 1 to 7 circles, there will be a flower with 1 to 7 petals. This flower, which the master is continuing to draw until it gets completed, is Abbasi flower, which is so prevalent in Esfahan School of Architecture. And about this, Abbasi flower, we should explain more and will do so later. But before the Abbasi flower, in advance, we should say that this shape that has come in with this javak and hamil and polychrome margin is called nagul in architect's jargon. We bring this nagul little by little and slowly in order to know what this khatai design is in tile working and in Esfahan School of Architecture when it is in its full elevation. Two, shaping the flower by repetition and multiplying the leaves. Leaves are drawn by interface of the 2 circles with borders less than half of each circle. Then it can be repeated from 1 to 7 times in the base circle until it becomes a flower made out of the repetition of the leaves. Well, we see that the Abbasi flower is being completed here by the master. And here again, this hamil becomes a branch in order for the khatai flower to climb higher and higher. Then, with this azure background and with the arrival of this polychrome tile, this is nagul, which goes to somehow approach its main manifestation. And now the third stage for shaping flowers, and this time by repetition of circles complemented with leaves. In this way, the circle is repeated and accompanied with leaves till the flower and the leaves and circles get to 7 repetitions, each one after another. An intertwined repetition to shape a new flower. A flower of khatai that when being multiplied on the flower string and undertaken by a master in tallworking becomes this. This growing khatai design embraced by this hue of turquoise that is the characteristic feature of Esfahan School of Architecture and Coloring and its base for the polychrome tiles. The fourth stage is shaping the flower by the repetition of leaves and this time complemented by circles. The story of this flower is something in complete similarity with the previous stage. Circle and leaves, totally similar, only with the difference that here the leaves and their repetition have the priority. That is, this time, it is the circle that is the complementary element or embellishing part of the design for the leaves, which have now become the main element for making flowers. Well, at last, khatai flowers in their full wonder and inspiration are climbing themselves in their eslimi on a background of azure tiles. These deep blue tiles, either with deep blue background or in some other colors, are separated and so orderly. These orderly square are called polychromes. These polychrome is among those main innovations in tile making and in Esfahan School of Architecture. The reason to its establishment is noteworthy and we'll say later. But before that later time, it should be pointed out that what we saw from drawing khatai flowers in these 4 stages that are described was not befitting enough at all. But the point is that here, in this limited boundary, there is neither enough time nor enough ground to talk about the types of khatai design. So with completing this naghul pattern that is so resembling to an upright prayer rug and reminds us of that, we are going to talk about khatai design so briefly. Even briefer than outlining the points to be mentioned. Well, naghul is finished too. This naghul design is a small part of the southern Avon of Charbagh Madrasa or seminary. Now, we go away from Charbagh to come to the types of flowers in khatai design. Each of these flowers have specific name and methods of drawing. A method adopted from the old times, till now. For instance, this is a bag chinari type flower that has shaped the base of the design under the western dome of Jame' Abbasi Mosque. We don't say anything about what the bag chinari type flower is, and where the inspiration has come from, and how it is implemented. But the story of this, that is Shah Abbasi flower, with its types, it's something different. If we don't run anything about this flower, it can be said that we have run almost nothing significant in regard to the design and this fixture embellishing form. By considering that, if you concentrate on the motif and the designer, of course in regard to the architecture, and even in other stages of embellishing designs, you have seen in many times they are sometimes different in regard to the details from one another. For instance, this one that is Abbasi flower with pomegranate type flower is among those flowers that is frequently seen in Esfahan School of Architecture. But what is to say is that the history of this flower goes back to a long time ago. It can be seen either in this plaster work in Ali Rapu Palace, in this shape we see, or in other parts of the same palace, with this shape full of flowers and leaves. Now, why these Abbasi flowers, with all these holistic or minute differences, are similar to one another in general? The reason is the existence of these infrastructures. Some infrastructures, such as Tah Konche, or the base of flower bud, Aine Gol, or the body of the flower, and Golbag, or petals. We see it on a vase of flower on the second story of Jame' Abbasi Mosque. Here again, it is in this painting, a miniature from Herat School of Painting. That is exactly before the start of School of Architecture, called Esfahan School of Architecture. But in fact, for tracing back the Lale Abbasi and the idea of where it sources from, we should refer to a time in the history, at least so many years before now. For instance, this Takht Jamshid or Persepolis, the base of the flower bud, the body of the flower and its petals, we see the huge similarity. Then, in this other instance, which is stony embellishment on the base of the columns of the Persepolis monument, again the base of the flower bud, the body of the flowers and its petals that is so evident. This instance can be seen so much after this, and indeed so elaborate and a little more elevated of this instance in Takht Jamshid, is in Kabud Mosque in its plaster works. Well, proceeding a little, we see this motif with the same form and in another shape, the flower with that same form in the base, and the body of the flower which resembles so much to a palm tree. Well, apart from the long history of palm and its abundance in type and variety in Iran, the occurrence of palm in the Darius seal and two other seals, one belonging to the ceremonial manager and the other one belonging to a treasury general, are signifying reasons on the deep-rooted role of palm or date tree image in Iranian mindset. For instance, this is an abstract form of palm leaves, what is seen both in plaster works and in tile working motifs and the sketch of carpet. But the story of palm and its inspirational root is not limited to these palm leaves. Just fancy looking attentively at this flower, which is a palm flower, its female breed. You see the base of the flower bud, the body of the flower and the petals, an abstract, simplified or sterilized image of palm or the nature that is so significant in Iranian mindset. Sometimes an abstract image and some other times an objective representative manifestation. For example, these clustered branches over the head of the king make a one-to-one image of the flourished buds of male palm tree, a symbol full of mercy and blessing with fertilizing potentials. Well, we see that despite all the imposed attacks to Iran along its history, again, Iranians are still so dynamic in keeping what belongs to them. So many things, just fancy. One of them is just this Lale Abbasi. And now, this is Master Shirovi, here busy of needle pricking or Suzan Zani on the lines of this Abbasi flower of his. A flower he drew himself. And why such a thing is done? Indeed, what he does is not for making tiles with this shape. What we see is a type of tile working called lakh, relief or embossed. And what the master is doing here is the pricking the needle to make polychrome tiles. This relief tile that is almost a continuation of those old relief tiles belong to the Mehrab of Sayyid Mosque of Esfahan, built in a period known as the second era of this school of architecture. These are the main background, white from polychrome tiles, in order for the main sketch to be implemented on. Relief or embossed tile and the rest of it. Margining on a background of polychrome tile. pouncing. Well, those needle pricking the master did on his own sketch will do just here. Here is exactly the point where mu'arraq tile working becomes a little different from polychrome tile. Here also we see that after the powder passes from the tiny holes of the sheet of paper, or when it pounces, then some lines are drawn based on the remaining thread, till later that it would be colored. Well, this mihrab got completed with its relief tiles and changed to a specimen to indicate the fact that in Esfahan School of Architecture, tile working is also a widespread embellishing design and so miscellaneous. Coloring. Well, here what we see is exactly that point of difference we said that exists in polychrome tiles but doesn't exist in mu'arraq specimen we saw so far. The main point also is this coloring. The color that after pouncing is implemented fluently and smoothly on the polychrome background in less time, in contrast with mu'arraq or mosaic tile working, in which it was the solid zirangi tile that was delicately broken by adds again and again so that it becomes this. But here, in this polychrome tile, it was not so, its reason being the sudden expansion of a capital, which was a new, and this time it had been chosen to be Esfahan. And the Iranians' nature that had expected the capital to be great and with a new spirit indeed. Then, as the fact that the job should have been done so quickly, tile workers deeply attempted in order to new flourishing of an embellishing fixture or design that might have been newer. A design with the material quicker to prepare, which was so appropriate for that construction procedure. It was supposed to be both expanded and quick. Therefore, polychrome tiles have come to be the most widely used embellishing fixture design in Esfahan School of Architecture. The polychrome type of tile working that accompanied with relief, gilt or luster tile, mosaic, zir naqshi, pishbor, lapparan, darham, and abrabad, whatever they are all precious heritage from those hands, that we all know what they do with soil.